He hired one woman. By sundown there were 4 of them in his kitchen, and he had no idea what had just happened to his life. Nebraska, in the fall of 1885, was a country of grass and wind and enormous silence, and no man on the whole rolling prairie kept a silence deeper than Beck Hollister. He was 39, a widower these 6 years, and he worked his good half-section south of the Loup River alone, in a fine frame house he had built with his own hands for a family that never came. For Sarah had died in the 2nd winter of their marriage, and the babies they had planned the house around had died with her, unborn, and Beck had gone on living in the 2 large rooms the way a man lives in a coat cut for someone he used to be. He had not wanted a housekeeper. His neighbor's wife, Mrs. Tandy, had shamed him into advertising for one, the house going to rack, she said, the man eating cold beans standing up like a bachelor. It was not decent, and so Beck had put 3 grudging lines in the county paper and half hoped no one would answer. Someone had answered. Her letter was neat and brief and asked only a fair wage and a fresh start, and it was signed M. Sutton, and Beck had written back that the position was hers, and had spent the 2 weeks since regretting it, because a housekeeper meant a stranger in his silence, and his silence was the last thing he had that still fit. She came up the section road on a Tuesday in a hired wagon, and Beck stood on his porch and watched her climb down, a tall, plain-dressed woman of about 27, with a weary set to her shoulders, and a steady, straight way of looking at a thing, and hands, he noted, that had done more work than a housekeeper's ought to have. Maren Sutton shook his hand like a man closing a deal, and looked past him at the neglected house with a frank, assessing eye. "Mr. Hollister, you have let a good house go to ruin," she said, "which tells me you are grieving something and not lazy, so I will not hold it against you. I can have this place fit to live in by the end of the week. My wages we agreed. I will earn them." She hesitated then, and something crossed her steady face that Beck would only understand by nightfall, a flinch, quickly buried, the look of a person bracing to be sent away before they have unpacked. "There is one thing I did not put in my letter, Misty, Hollister. I meant to tell you when I arrived. I find I would rather tell you after supper, when you have seen how I work." "Tell me now," Beck said, because 6 years alone had made him plain. But she did not have to, because that was the moment the 2nd wagon came over the rise. It came slow, overloaded, drawn by a spavined mule, and it was full of furniture and crates and bedding lashed under canvas, a whole household's worth of goods, and driving it was a girl of perhaps 17, and beside her sat a girl of about 12 with a book in her lap, and wedged between the crates, half asleep with a rag doll, was a very small girl who could not have been more than 7. The wagon rolled into Beck Hollister's yard and stopped, and the 3 girls looked at him with 3 different degrees of hope and fear, and Maren Sutton closed her eyes for 1 second as though praying, and then opened them and lifted her chin and faced him. "Those are my sisters," she said, "Tessa and Junie and Pearl. Our parents are dead, and our farm is gone, and there is no one else in this world to have them but me, and there is nowhere on God's earth for them to go tonight but back into that wagon. I did not tell you because you would have said no, and I could not afford your no." Her voice did not shake, though the cost of the steadiness showed. "I will take my wages in food and a roof for the 4 of us, and not a penny more. I am the best housekeeper you will ever hire, and I come with 3 children you did not ask for, and I know exactly what that is worth. And I am asking you anyway, because I have run out of every other door." She squared herself for it. "Send us on if you must, but say it quick, and I will turn the wagon before the little one wakes, and has to see it. Beck Hollister stood on the porch of the silent house he had built for a family that never came, and he looked at the overloaded wagon, and at the 7-year-old asleep with her doll, and at the woman who had just laid her whole desperate hand face up on his porch rail rather than lie to him twice. And the narrator will tell you that a smaller man would have sent them on, and been within his rights, and eaten his cold beans in his clean, quiet house for another 20 years, and called it peace. "There is a hot stove inside and not enough in the pot," Beck said, "which I reckon you can fix faster than I can. Best get the little one in out of the wind before she catches her death." He came down the steps and reached up into the wagon, careful, and lifted the sleeping child down himself, doll and all, and she stirred against his shoulder and did not wake, and Beck Hollister, who had not held a child since he dug 2 graves in one, the small one inside the large, stood very still a moment with the warm weight of her, and had to master his own face before he could carry her inside. "Rooms upstairs been empty 6 years, he said gruffly, over his shoulder. "Might as well have somebody in them. This way." And that was how a man built for solitude came. In the space of one Nebraska sundown, to have 4 women under his roof, and no earthly idea what had happened to him. The house woke up that night for the first time since Sarah died, and it never truly went quiet again. By full dark the stove was roaring and the pot was full, and the long-dead kitchen smelled of biscuits and coffee. And the noise, the sheer human noise of it, 4 voices, a dropped spoon, the 12-year-old Junie reading aloud, the 17-year-old Tessa laughing at something, the baby Pearl asking 6 questions a minute, filled the 2 large rooms clear up to the rafters and pressed against Beck Hollister, where he sat at the head of his own table, like a stone in a river of it. He did not know where to put himself. He had forgotten a house could sound like this. He had, if he was honest in the dark of it, spent 6 years making very sure a house never sounded like this again, because the silence could not hurt him and this could. He took himself out to the bunkhouse to sleep, and made it plain, and made it early, before any of them could wonder. House is yours, all 4, and the doors is yours to bolt. I'll bunk out with the hands' quarters empty as they are, and there'll be no talk in this county about how the Sutton girls were kept. Not while I draw breath. It was the plainest way he had of saying that their dignity was safe under his roof, and Maren heard the whole of it, and something in her weary face eased by a degree it had not eased in years. But before he went out into the cold he stopped, because on the porch, where it had sat untouched for 6 years, was Sarah's rocking chair, the good hickory chair he had made her the winter they married, that she had meant to rock their children in, that he had not been able to sit in or throw out or move from its place. And small Pearl, worn out from the long wagon road, had found it in the dark and climbed into it and fallen fast asleep, her doll under her chin, rocking gently in the prairie wind. Beck stood over the chair a long moment. Then he went inside without a word, and came back with a quilt, and laid it over the sleeping child in his dead wife's chair, as gently as a man handles a thing he is afraid to wake or to want, and went out to the bunkhouse and lay a long time listening to the impossible warm noise of his own house, and did not sleep, and could not have told a living soul whether what he felt was grief or its opposite, or how thin, after all, the line between them had turned out to be. The days that followed built into something Beck Hollister had no name for, and had stopped believing was owed to a man like him. Maren Sutton was, as advertised, the best he had ever seen. In a week the house shone. In 2, the accounts he had let drift for 6 years were squared in a clear-schooled hand, and Beck learned that his housekeeper had kept her dead father's farm books since she was 16 and could find a penny in a ledger the way a hawk finds a mouse in a field. The girls found their places like water finding its level. Tessa, 17 and romantic, mothering the little one and sighing over the hired hand. Junie, 12, following Beck to the barn with 100 questions and a book she read to the horses. And Pearl, 7, who attached herself to the silent widower with the terrible single-mindedness of a small child who has decided, and who took to climbing into his lap at supper as though the space had been left open there on purpose, which, though neither of them said it, it perhaps had been. He did not know how to be around so much life, and it showed, and it was. The narrator will not pretend otherwise, frequently comic. A solitary man of 9 and 30 ambushed by hair ribbons and spelling lessons and the great mystery of what 4 females required, standing baffled in his own kitchen, holding a doll that needed its arm sewn, saying, "Well, and I reckon," and fleeing to the barn where things made sense. But a house is a stubborn teacher, and a warm one wears a man down, and by the 3rd week Beck Hollister had learned to sew a doll's arm badly, and to duck the low doorway Pearl had claimed for a fort, and to save the crust of his bread because Junie liked it. And he did these things without deciding to, the way the ground learns to hold the spring. He began to notice Maren the way a man notices the weather turning, the way she was the last to eat and the first to rise, always, the way she carried all 4 of them on her straight back and had plainly not let a single soul carry her since she was a girl. There was an evening he came up from the barn in a cold rain and found her on the porch with her hands wrapped around a cup, staring out at the dark with her guard down for once, and she looked so tired and so alone in the middle of the family she had saved that Beck did the boldest thing he had done in 6 years. He sat down on the step near her, not too near, and he said nothing, and he simply stayed, so that for a quarter of an hour the woman who carried everyone did not have to be alone with it. She did not thank him. But she did not go in either, and that was its own kind of answer. It was near the end of that 3rd week that Beck learned the woman he had taken in was no one's victim, and had never been. They were doing the accounts by lamplight when he said, idle, that it was a wonder a good farm like the Suttons had gone under at all, and Maren's pen went still, and then she told him, flat and precise, the thing she had carried alone. It did not go under. It was taken. Her jaw was tight. My father borrowed $400 from Orrin Meacham, the merchant in Ash Hollow, the year before he died. When Pa was killed under a wagon and could not speak for himself, Meacham produced a note for $1,100, with interest figured at a rate no honest man charges, and papers I am nearly certain my father never signed. I kept the books, Mr. Hollister. I know to the penny what we owed, and it was not $1,100. But I was 20 years old with 3 children, and no lawyer, and a dead father, and Meacham had the judge to supper every Sunday, and he took the farm for the debt, and told the county he was being Christian about it. She looked up, and her eyes were steady and hard. So do not think I am a poor woman who lost her home to bad luck. I am a woman who was robbed by a man with a good coat and a friend on the bench, and I have kept every figure that proves it in a tin box at the bottom of that wagon, waiting for the day I have the strength to make somebody listen. Beck Hollister looked at his housekeeper across the lamplit ledgers, and he understood how badly the whole world had misjudged her, that she was not a burden he had taken on, but the sharpest, bravest person he had met in his life. A woman who had stood between 3 children and ruin for 7 years and lost only the ground, never her feet. "You've been robbed," he said slowly, "and you kept the proof, and you've been waiting on somebody to stand with you while you use it. I have been waiting, Maren said, a long time. Before the hard weather came down out of the north, and it would, soon enough, the way it always does on that high prairie, there was a stretch of golden autumn days at the Hollister place. The house loud and warm and the account square, and a small girl asleep each evening in a chair that had rocked empty for 6 years. If you have stayed with this story so far, stay a little longer. What happens next is the part that changes everything. And if tales of love that outlast the hardest country the West could offer are the kind that keep you company, the small bell beneath this story is how we go on meeting like this. Orrin Meacham came out from Ash Hollow on a cold, bright morning in a fine buggy, wearing the good coat Maren had spoken of, and he brought the county's discomfort with him like a smell. Hollister. He did not get down. I have come about the Sutton children. It has reached me, it has reached the whole county, that 3 underage girls are lodged under the roof of an unmarried man in the keeping of a woman with no means and no husband and no standing to keep them. It is not decent, and it is not lawful. He smiled, and it was worse than a scowl. As it happens, I hold their late father's debts, which makes me the nearest thing to a guardian these girls have got. I mean to do right by them. I will take the 3 young ones back to Ash Hollow and see them bound out to good families where they can earn their keep respectably, and the county will thank me. And this arrangement can end before it becomes a scandal that follows all of you to your graves. The order can be signed by Friday. I am giving you the courtesy of knowing first. And here was the moment the whole thing turned. For everything Meacham said had the shape of the law and the sound of decency, and both were lies, and the terrible thing was how well they would serve, because a county that loves to feel righteous will always believe a well-coated man who offers it a way to punish a woman for being poor. Beck saw the whole ugly machine of it at once. Bound out. 3 sisters scattered to 3 households to work for their bread. Tessa and Junie and baby Pearl split up and worked like hired stock. The family Maren had bled 7 years to hold together, taken apart, with a judge's signature, by the same man who had already taken their land. He saw Maren, at the door behind him, go white and grip the frame. Beck Hollister stepped down off his porch into the cold and walked out to the fine buggy. "They stay," he said, "all 4, and I will tell you how it is going to be, Meacham, so there is no misunderstanding between us. There is one clean way to make it decent and lawful for those girls to stay under this roof, and it is for their sister to marry the man who owns it. And if Maren Sutton will have me, and God knows why she would, then by Friday there will be no unmarried man and no unmarried woman on this place for you to cluck over, only a family. And you will need a better lie than propriety to break a family." His voice never rose. "You want to talk about who is fit to keep those children? I have a full pantry and a dry roof and 80 acres of good corn. You have a padded note and a judge who comes to supper. Get off my land. And you tell that judge that the Sutton books are out of the tin box now, and being read by folks who can add." Meacham's smile fell off. "You will regret this," he said, and turned the buggy hard, and drove off toward Ash Hollow with the good coat flapping, and Beck stood in the cold and did not turn around, because he had just proposed marriage to a woman by shouting past her at a swindler, which was, he was aware, about the poorest piece of courting in the history of the Nebraska prairie. Maren did not say yes that day, or no, but that night she came out to the bunkhouse, the first time she had ever crossed that yard after dark, and she stood in the door with a lamp, and she said the thing she had come to say. "I will not marry a man to be rescued, Beck Hollister. I have kept myself and 3 children off the charity of this world for 7 years, and I will not become a charity now, not even yours, not even kind." Her voice was fierce and low. "But I have watched you carry my Pearl to bed, and save the crust for Junie, and sit on a cold step, so I would not have to be alone with the dark, and you have never once made me feel the weight of what I cost you. So I am not asking what you can do for us." She swallowed. "I am asking you to tell me the truth of what you want, plainly, like the plain man you are. Because I have been the one who wants things for other people for so long that I have near forgot how to be wanted for my own self, and I find I cannot marry you until I know whether you are opening your house to 4 strays, or opening it to me." And by the lamplight in the bunkhouse door, Beck Hollister told her the truth he had not spoken to a living soul in 6 years. "I built that house for a family," he said. "Sarah and me, we drew it on paper before we ever cut a board. A room for this child, and a room for that one. A long table, a chair on the porch for her to rock the babies. And she died in the second winter with the first of them still unborn, and I finished the house anyway, God knows why. And then I lived in it like a ghost for 6 years. Every empty room a thing I could not look at. I quit wanting. Wanting is what had near killed me. He made himself meet her eyes, and then a woman I hired came up my road with 3 children and a mule and every reason in the world for me to say no, and by sundown my dead house was so loud I could not think. And I have never in my life been so glad of anything. I do not want to rescue you, Maren. I am not that good a man. I want the noise. I want the crust saved and the doll sewed and the chair rocking and a woman on my cold step who lets me sit by her. I want the family I built the house for, and I have finally figured out it was never going to be the one I planned. It was going to be the one that drove up over the rise in an overloaded wagon and dared me to send it away." His voice went rough. "I am not offering you a rescue. I am asking you to fill a house that has stood empty 6 years. That is a selfish thing to want, and it is the truest thing I have got." Maren Sutton set down the lamp, and when she crossed the bunkhouse floor and put her work-worn hand against his weathered face, the kiss she gave him was quiet and sure, and what broke open in her was not the giddy thing the poets promised her sister Tessa, but its deeper cousin, the bone-deep relief of a woman who has held the whole world up alone for 7 years feeling, for the first time, another pair of hands come up under the weight beside her own. Orrin Meacham came back for the children the way such men do, with the law, and with cruelty in the timing, on the very morning the first blizzard of the winter came howling down off the North Plains. He came with the county sheriff and a signed order, and 2 hired men in a wagon, meaning to load 3 girls into it and drive them to Ash Hollow before the storm closed the roads. And he had not reckoned on the storm coming faster than the paper. The wind rose to a scream, and the snow came sideways in a white wall while they were still arguing in the yard, and in the confusion of it, the shouting, the sheriff's uncertainty, Meacham's men reaching for a terrified Pearl, the little girl bolted out of the yard and into the white, running blind from the men who had come to take her, and was gone into the blizzard in the space of a breath. The yard went from a struggle to a horror in one instant. Beck Hollister did not hesitate. He was on his horse and into the wall of white before anyone could speak, following the small tracks already filling with snow, and the storm swallowed him too, and for a long and killing, while there was nothing in the world but wind. He found her, found the child curled at the bottom of a draw a half-mile out, half frozen and alive, and he got his coat around her and got her up against his chest inside it, but his horse had gone down on the ice of the creek and could not rise, and Beck, went the last quarter mile back on foot into the teeth of it, carrying the child, and he made the barn and put her living into her sister's arms before his own legs gave out, and it was only then anyone saw that he had gone into that storm in his shirt sleeves and given every stitch of warmth he had to the little girl, and that his own hands and face were the gray-white of a man the cold had nearly finished. But it was Maren Sutton who ended Orrin Meacham, and she ended him with a tin box. While the storm still screamed, and Beck lay by the barn stove with his sisters-in-law heaping every quilt in the house on him, Maren walked back out into the yard where the sheriff sheltered his eyes, and Meacham stood clutching his precious order, and she put her father's account books into the sheriff's hands, and she read them to him at the top of her voice over the wind, the $400 borrowed and the $1,100 claimed, the interest no honest man charged, her dead father's signature that did not match itself from one page to the next. You came out here in a blizzard to bind out 3 orphans to save a man's ledger. She cried. Look at the figures. He did not lend $1,100. He stole a farm and called it a debt, and now he means to steal 3 children and call it charity. And you have brought the law out in a killing storm to help him do it. I have kept the proof 7 years. Read it, Sheriff. Read it now, and then you tell me which of us is unfit to keep these girls. And the sheriff, a hard, practical man who had come out that morning half ashamed of his errand, stood in the driving snow and read enough of it to see the whole ugly shape at last, the padded note, the forged hand, the well-coated thief who had used the bench like a tool. And he folded the book shut and turned to Orrin Meacham, with a face like winter itself, and he did not need to say much. Meacham's own hired men had already seen a rancher nearly die in the snow for a child that was not his, and heard the figures read out, and they wanted no more part of it. One by one, in the white roar of that storm, every man in the yard turned away from Orrin Meacham, and a swindler stripped of his good name in front of the county he had ruled is a swindler finished. Storm or no storm, they carried the books and the truth to the county seat when the roads opened. Orrin Meacham was charged with fraud and forgery on the evidence a robbed girl had kept in a tin box for 7 years, and the friendly judge, finding the wind had changed, discovered a sudden great enthusiasm for the letter of the law, and Meacham lost the good coat and a good deal more, and went to answer for it where such men go, and the Sutton farm, or the worth of it, came back in time to the 4 sisters he had tried to scatter. By spring the Hollister place was the loudest house on the Loup River, and no one who came to it could have imagined it had ever been quiet. Beck healed slow from the storm, and healed whole, minus the tip of one finger the frost had claimed, which he said was cheap at the price, and which Pearl liked to hold. He and Maren were married at the house before the corn was knee-high, with Tessa weeping happily, and Junie reading the verse, and the whole neighborhood come to eat at the long table Beck had built years before for a family he had given up on. A table that was full at last, every chair and 1 chair short, so that a new one had to be made. And on the porch, worn smooth again by 6 years of standing empty, and now by a great deal of use, Sarah's hickory rocking chair rocked in the prairie evenings under a changing weight. The little one Pearl, and then Pearl grown too big, and Junie in her place, and in time a small new Hollister who came along the 2nd year to fill 1 more of the rooms the house had been built and waited so long to hold. Beck took to sitting on the step beside that chair in the warm dark the way he had once sat beside a tired woman with a cup, and Maren would come out and find him there, and sit, and the 2 of them would listen to the impossible loud life of the house behind them. the house that had stood silent as a grave for 6 years and was now so full it could barely hold itself. And Beck Hollister, who had built a home for a family and buried the family and stopped expecting the home, would take his wife's work-worn hand in his frost-scarred one and be in the loud warm heart of the life that had driven up over the rise and refused to be sent away. More at peace than a solitary man had ever thought this earth would let him be. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived in an overloaded wagon, uninvited and unafraid, and filled a house that grief had emptied, then this story was for you. Out on the wide grass of Nebraska, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the family that gathered under Beck Hollister's roof became the kind that does not need anyone to remember it to be real. He hired one woman and got 4, and a full loud house, and the one thing solitude had never once given him, and he spent the rest of his days grateful for the sundown that took his quiet away. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, hard men, and the kind of winter only the West knows, speak to something in you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.